as part of these lessons on learning Git, we have provided a simplified cheat sheet / diagram that shows how to manage your source and branches in the software development process while using source control. Primarily, this one is directed at Git. So how do we use Git to manage the software development process effectively while managing our source and making sure that things don't get messed up super easy, since we have a large number of people working on the same project. Now, this is a cheat sheet that you'll have. It's part of the downloads. I'm going to walk through it really quick. It's pretty complex, even though I've stated it's simplified. For a beginner using Git and someone who is unfamiliar with actual enterprise software development and using Git to a very masterful level, this might be confusing, but I'm providing this so that as you're using Git and as you're getting comfortable with it and as you become more experienced with software development and the processes and procedures, it'll start to make sense. And you can always come back and rewatch this video in order to better understand this cheat sheet. Now, in this cheat sheet, I have provided hints on Git commands that you can use in order to accomplish specific tasks that are associated with this process that's outlined very specifically. Now, in here, we're using kind of a swim lanes diagram, meaning that we've got lanes of activity that all progress from top to bottom, and you can see that time is displayed as progressing from top to bottom. If you look at the line over here, you'll see that time starts here and then it progresses as you move down. Now, the reason why we have this diagram along with the other ones is this particular diagram will show you that over time, this is how the branches that we've talked about in other videos, this is how they're used, and this is how they interact one with another. So we'll start out with the master branch right here. Master branch, as I've said in previous videos, is the branch that holds the most recent version of your source and is the combined source of all the software developers that have been working, and it holds the most recent version of what we think is functioning working code. All right, it hasn't been tested yet by QA, but it is assumed to be the most recent functioning version of the code. Now, in another video, we talked about how Git repositories work on the local developer's machine. And we talked about the fact that you'll have the master branch, but you'll probably want to do your work in a feature branch, or sometimes they're called issue branch if you're working on a bug. And those are usually local branches that are only on your machine, only in your repository, and they are temporary, meaning that you create them, you work on your code in this branch, which is a copy of the master branch, and in these particular branches, you're going to go ahead and start out with a copy of everything that's in master, and that branch gets created. Then what happens is you go ahead and as a software developer, you're going to go ahead and make changes to that source code, and that's what the orange dot indicates, is you've made changes to that branch. You're working on a feature or you're working on fixing a bug. And then once you're done and you've tested it locally and it feels good and you feel like it's ready to go, then what's going to happen is you're going to go ahead and you're going to commit those changes to the master branch. And if everything goes good, there aren't any conflicts and everything is good to go and it's now in the master branch, then that branch usually gets deleted because you don't need it anymore. The software is already into the master branch. And then, of course, that software would then be kicked up to the primary repository on the remote server. And this is only showing the process of how code moves between branches and then the commands you use in order to get them in between branches. So here we've got our little commit that we did to the master branch. And then we've got all the commits that happened from our team members, all the other software developers that are working on this software and have tasks and assignments and user stories. So while you've been working on this, they've made commits, and you can see it right here. You have a developer that made a commit while you were working on your stuff, and this yellow line indicates that before you pushed all your code up here, you actually pulled the most recent version of master from the remote server, and you fixed any conflicts that may have happened before you pushed up to the primary server. And then here we can see we've got multiple commits by other developers. And then here we'll see that we started a new task, and the new task involves cloning that repository, not cloning the repository, but creating a branch of master in order to work on an issue or a defect or a feature. And then of course, while we're working on our stuff in this timeline, we could have team members that are also committing the code that they're working on, and they're committing it back to master. So here, we've made a change here, we've made a change here, and this indicates that before we push back up to master, we're going to pull down all of the code that our team members have committed, and then we are going to check for conflicts, and we're going to fix any conflicts that happen between our code and theirs because they beat us to the master branch. It becomes our responsibility. We check, we make sure everything is good, and once everything is good, then that code goes back up to master and we delete that branch. And so this is the basics for you as a software developer working with the master branch and making sure that you're merging in your code and that you are taking into account by pulling your team's code and checking for conflicts. Now, usually as a software developer, you're not really all that involved in how code is pushed to staging and pushed to production, but it's always good to understand how it works. So usually there is somebody who is in charge of deployment. So it could be in the IT department, it could be part of the software team. They're usually a deployment manager is kind of what they're called sometimes. And so here you can see we've gone through a cycle. A major feature was done. Team members also put in a major feature. And then we get to a point right here where I guess the software architect or the project manager or somebody has deemed that we need to do a rollout to staging so that quality assurance can be done on everything that's been done. So at this point, the master branch is then pushed over to staging, and we get a tag on this particular commit called staging 1.0.0. Now, there's different naming conventions for tags and versions of software. We're just going to stick with that for now. So here, that code has been pushed up to staging. It goes to QA, and if it fails QA, they find some bugs, then of course all those bugs go back, and then the developers have to work on them. And we can see right here, this shows us that, you know, it failed testing, it went back, and then of course now we see developers are responsible for working on defects, and then they go through that process. Now, if it goes to staging and it passed, which is what happens right here, then if it passes all of the testing, then the stuff that's in staging or that particular branch that was found to be good is then pushed to production, and it gets an official production release version. So in this case, it's version 1.0.0. And then that's the live code that's running that all the customers can see. Now down here, you'll see that the feature/issue branches, which are those temporary branches used by the developers to manage their workflow, they usually happen on the development computer and then of course get pushed up to the remote repository. But the staging branch, it's usually only checked out and run on your staging servers. And then of course production is usually only run on your production servers. And in this case, we're talking about, you know, a web app or a distributed system that's been built that requires servers. If it's desktop software, it's a little bit different. But this is your cheat sheet on how to use Git, how to use branches, how to make sure you're managing the merging of branches and your workflow to make sure that everybody's following the same workflow. I actually use this diagram in my contracting and the companies that I've owned in the past. I've used this in order to help all of my teams stay 100% on the same track as to how we are using Git when we are doing software development projects, and how things get pushed and pulled between branches, and then how they end up on different environments, such as your developer computer, the staging server, and the production server.